took the night shift because I needed the money, plain and simple. I was 24, behind on rent, and the warehouse posted an opening for an overnight inventory clerk that paid $4 more an hour than anything during the day. The building sat off a 2-lane highway outside town, a long grey box surrounded by gravel and sodium lights that buzzed instead of glowed. My job was simple: walk the aisles with a handheld scanner, confirm pallet counts against the manifest, flag discrepancies, restock the small parts bins near the loading dock. 10 hours, one 15-minute break, and for the first 3 weeks, nothing happened that I couldn't explain. The warehouse held automotive parts, mostly brake pads, alternators, boxes of spark plugs stacked 12 feet high on steel shelving that ran the length of the building in long straight corridors. There were no windows. The only light came from fluorescent tubes overhead, half of which had been dead since before I started. So certain aisles sat in a kind of grey twilight, even with everything technically on. I remember my trainer, a heavy-set guy named Dale who did the shift for 2 years before transferring 2 days, telling me on my first night that the place got quiet in a way that took getting used to. "You'll hear it settle," he said. "Metal contracting once the loading doors close and the temperature drops. Don't let it spook you." I didn't think much of it then. I was more concerned with learning the scanner system and memorizing which aisles held which The first 2 weeks passed in a blur of monotony. I'd clock in at 10, walk my routes, log my counts, eat a sandwich in the break room at 2, and clock out at 8 in the morning with the sun already up. Driving home half asleep with the radio on to keep me alert, the first thing I noticed, and I want to be clear, I didn't think anything of it at the time, was that aisle 14 was always colder than the rest of the building. Not dramatically, just enough that I'd notice goosebumps on my arms when I turned into it, and then not notice anything unusual by the time I reached the far end. I mentioned it once to the day's supervisor during a shift changeover, and she just shrugged and said something about the loading dock seal on that side being old, letting in outside air. That made sense. I stopped thinking about it. It was the 4th week when things started to feel different, though even now, explaining it, I have trouble putting my finger on the exact moment I knew something was wrong. It wasn't one incident. It was an accumulation. Small wrong notes stacking on top of each other until the whole chord sounded off. The first note was the radio. There was an old boombox in the break room that the overnight guys used, tuned to a classic rock station that played out of the next county over. I liked having it on low while I worked, something to fill the silence. One night, around 1 in the morning, I walked past the break room on my route and heard the station had changed. It wasn't static, and it wasn't another station bleeding through. It was a single voice, a man speaking low and even, almost like a radio host mid-sentence, except I couldn't make out a single word. Not because it was quiet. It was clear. I just couldn't process what he was saying. The way you can't quite parse a language you don't speak, even though you can hear every syllable. I stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds before I walked in and turned the dial back to the rock station. I told myself it had drifted, that radio signals do strange things at night, bouncing off the atmosphere or whatever. I didn't turn the boombox off. I probably should have. The second note came 2 nights later. I was doing my count in aisle 9, near the back corner where the returns and damaged stock sat waiting to be processed, when my scanner buzzed with a location error. The system was telling me I was standing in aisle 14. I looked up at the placard bolted to the shelving above me. It clearly read 9. I rebooted the scanner, walked the aisle again, and it corrected itself. A glitch, I figured. The scanners were older units, prone to software hiccups. I didn't report it, because reporting minor glitches meant paperwork. And paperwork meant staying an extra 20 minutes after an already long shift. I want to slow down here, because I think this is where I made my first real mistake. Not a mistake that caused anything, exactly, but a mistake in how I was thinking about the building. I decided, somewhere in that 4th week, that everything strange had a mundane explanation, and once I'd decided that, I stopped really looking at anything. I stopped listening to what my body was telling me, which was that something in that building did not want me there after midnight. The next incident I can't explain away, no matter how many times I've turned it over since. I was on my break, sitting in the small employee lounge with my sandwich, half watching a muted TV bolted to the wall that only got 2 channels, when I heard footsteps in the main warehouse. Slow, deliberate, the particular scrape of a work boot against concrete. I wasn't alarmed at first. I assumed it was the security contractor who did a walkthrough twice a shift, checking the exterior doors and the loading dock locks. I called out, in here, the way I usually did when he passed by, since he liked to poke his head in and chat for a minute. No one answered. The footsteps kept going, slow and even, moving down what sounded like aisle 12, which ran directly behind the break room wall. I sat still and listened. They reached the end of the aisle, paused for a long moment, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and then started again, moving back the way they'd come. I got up and walked to the break room door, looked down the corridor toward aisle 12. Nothing. No security guard. No one at all. I checked the time log on the security kiosk near the front, the kind that requires guards to badge in at checkpoints during their rounds. The last checkpoint scan was over 90 minutes earlier. He hadn't been in the building. I told myself it was the building settling. Exactly what Dale had warned me about on my first night. Metal ductwork contracting in the cold. I have replayed that sound more times than I can count since then, and I know, the way you know things in your gut rather than your head, that it was not ductwork. Ductwork doesn't pause. Ductwork doesn't turn around. After that night, I started bringing a knife to work. Not a big one, just a folding pocket knife I kept clipped inside my jacket, which is a strange thing to admit, because at the time I couldn't have told you what I thought I needed protection from. I just felt, very strongly, that I wanted something in my hand if I ever needed it. The 5th week is when I met the other night employee, though met isn't quite the right word, because I never actually saw her face to face in a way that felt normal. Her name, according to the schedule posted in the break room, was Renata, and she worked the opposite end of the warehouse doing quality control on returned parts. A job that mostly kept her in a small, enclosed office near aisle 1, about as far from my usual route as you could get in that building. We were technically co-workers, both clocked in for the same 10-hour block, but our paths rarely crossed because our work didn't require it. I started finding notes, not addressed to me specifically, more like she was leaving little observations on sticky notes stuck to random shelving units. The kind of thing you'd do if you were bored and wanted to leave a trace of yourself somewhere. Most of them were mundane. Music too loud again, lol. Someone left the dock door open, freezing in here. Small, human, ordinary. But around the 6th week, the notes changed. I found one stuck to a pallet in aisle 14, That same cold aisle, that red. Do you hear him too, or is it just me? I stood there holding that little yellow square of paper for a long time. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know her, hadn't spoken to her beyond a wave across the parking lot at shift change. And now I was holding a note that suggested she was experiencing the exact same creeping wrongness I'd been trying to rationalize away for a month. I found her office that same night. I told myself I was just going to say hello, maybe compare notes, literally. The office door was propped open a few inches, light spilling out into the dark aisle. I knocked and pushed it open, and it was empty. Her jacket was still on the back of the chair. Her coffee, still faintly steaming, sat next to a stack of paperwork. Her scanner, the handheld unit every employee was issued, sat on the desk, powered on, its screen showing an active countdown timer set for 11 minutes and counting down, though I had no idea what she'd been timing or why. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've thought about it so many times since, wondering if things would have gone differently. I did not call anyone. I did not immediately search the building. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a long time, and some old animal part of my brain told me very clearly to leave her office, walk back to my side of the warehouse, and pretend I had never come looking for her at all. I almost listened to it. Instead, I called out her name into the dark aisles beyond her office twice, and got nothing back except my own voice returning to me off the metal shelving. I checked the loading dock. I checked the break room. I checked the restroom near the front offices. 20 minutes into looking, my scanner buzzed with another location error, the same kind I'd dismissed weeks earlier, telling me I was in aisle 14 when I was standing in the front lobby by the time clock. This time, I didn't dismiss it. Something about the pattern of it, the specific and repeated insistence on that one location, felt less like a glitch and more like a message. Absurd as that sounds, to say out loud, I walked to aisle 14. The cold hit me the way it always did, a noticeable drop the moment I turned the corner, and about halfway down, I found her shoes. Just her shoes, sitting neatly side by side on the concrete, laces still tied, as if she'd stepped out of them rather than been forced out of them. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing torn or knocked over on the shelving. Just 2 shoes and an absence. I did call for help then. I ran back to the front office, my hands shaking so badly I had to try 3 times to dial correctly, and told the dispatcher that a coworker was missing and that I thought something was very wrong in the building. While I waited on the line, standing in the brightest, most exposed part of the warehouse I could find, I heard the footsteps again. Slow, even, the same scrape of a boot on concrete, except this time they were coming from the direction of aisle 14, moving steadily toward the front office where I stood. I stayed on the phone. I kept talking to the dispatcher, kept my eyes on the corridor where the sound was coming from, and the footsteps stopped at the exact edge of where the fluorescent light gave way to the dimmer stretch of the warehouse, maybe 30 feet from where I stood. They just stopped. No further sound. No shape stepped into the light, though I stared at that boundary until my eyes ached, until the responding officer's flashlight beam swept across the parking lot outside and pulled my attention away for 1 single second. When I looked back, there was nothing there, obviously, and I've told myself 100 times since that there was never anything there to begin with. That fear does strange things to perception in an empty building at 3 in the morning. But I know what I heard stop exactly at that boundary of light, and I know it did not sound like ductwork. And I know that I have never been able to make myself believe the two things happened separately. Her disappearance and those footsteps. No matter how many times the police report used words like unexplained and no signs of forced entry and insufficient evidence, they never found her. The warehouse closed the night shift permanently about 2 weeks after, officially due to operational restructuring. Though I've heard from a friend who still works days that they quietly hired an overnight security team with dogs instead of resuming normal staffing. I don't work there anymore. I don't work nights anywhere anymore, not because I made some grand decision about it, but because I physically cannot make myself walk into a dim, quiet building after dark without my chest tightening and my hands going cold. Sometimes, when I'm home alone late enough, doing something as ordinary as washing dishes or brushing my teeth, I'll hear a floorboard settle somewhere in the house, the kind of sound every old house makes. And for one full second before my rational mind catches up, I am back in that cold aisle, listening to something pause at the exact edge of the light, deciding whether or not to take one more step toward me.